Tonight, we delve into the bleak, perilous, and far from glamorous reality of medieval assassins, those elusive figures who slipped through castle corridors and shadowy streets to alter the course of history with stealth and steel. Despite modern portrayals, the truth is, the life of a medieval assassin was grim. No one back then aspired to such a role. No one woke up thinking, I'd love to risk my life for a few coins and spend 3 days hiding in a barrel. It wasn't a profession. It was a desperate fallback when life had thoroughly unraveled. These individuals weren't elite warriors raised in secret orders. They were impoverished villagers, dishonored fighters, former criminals, or invisible members of society who could vanish without a trace. If you had wealth or status, even something as modest as a goat, you weren't the one sneaking through shadows. You were the one paying someone else to do it. But if you had nothing to lose, no future, and a knack for slipping into places unnoticed, someone might just pass you a pouch of coins and murmur a name. And it was never someone easy. Targets were powerful, corrupt nobles, wealthy clerics, or heavily guarded figures surrounded by walls and men with swords. The reward was tempting, but the job was terrifying, and it was always a last resort. Perks? None. No prestige, no security, no breaks. You couldn't openly admit what you did. If asked, you were a travelling peddler. The merchandise, red and not for sale. This wasn't a life people dreamed of. It was one they fell into after being cast aside by the world, clad in a tattered cloak and clutching a worn blade. Forget the myths. These people didn't train under candlelight in secret sanctuaries. There were no wise teachers, no structured lessons, and certainly no epic training montages. You survived by trial and error, mostly error. If you had a military background, great. You knew how to grip a blade. If not, you figured it out as you went, often while dangling from rooftops or sneaking past guards with your heart pounding in your throat. Poisons? They were a gamble, sometimes effective, sometimes just mildly inconvenient. Occasionally, they backfired, literally. There was no instruction manual, no organized guild welcoming new members with tips and tactics. If someone showed you the ropes, it was brief and out of necessity, not mentorship. And weaponry. You carried what you could steal or hide, daggers, cords, maybe a small blade. You weren't a trained killer with polished skills. You were someone who moved silently, blended in, and relied more on luck than talent. Success came from staying alive long enough to escape unseen. It was a hard, lonely path with no accolades or graduation ceremonies, just bruises, scars, and the constant awareness that you were utterly alone. And the reason you took it on in the first place? Coin. That cold, clinking promise of silver. It was always about the coin. In truth, you were paid with deception. When someone hires a killer, they're not seeking a partnership. They want a one-time service, no questions asked, and ideally, no witnesses left behind, including the assassin. You might get a pouch of silver, half up front, and the rest after the job is done, if they're feeling generous. But after the job is done usually means after they've made sure you didn't mess it up, cause them trouble, or leave any trace. It also means surviving long enough to claim your reward, which they're not keen on. So you take the job. You sneak through alleys, risk your neck, maybe silence a noble in his bed. It's not elegant work. And when you return? Ah, yes, about that payment. They're gone. Or worse, they try to kill you. A blade in the gut costs less than keeping a promise. And if you do get paid, it's never worth it. not for the danger, the blood, or the time spent hiding in filth with nothing but doubt and regret. You might get a few coins and a cold dismissal, no thanks, no record. You were never there. Sometimes the whole contract was a lie, just a setup. You'd be told to eliminate a high-value target, only to find a decoy and a room full of guards, a trap. Welcome to your execution, pre-scheduled and perfectly baited. And if the job was real, there was still no recourse. You couldn't take it to court. What judge would hear a complaint about a broken deal on a hit? The only courtroom you'd see was the kind with a rope waiting. So you learn to demand payment early, trust no one, not even the scribe who promised this job would change your life. It did, just not in the way you hoped. The life of an assassin was made of broken deals and a quick disappearance before they broke you. So you took the job, lied to about the money, probably doomed. Let's talk tools. Forget stories and games. There were no hidden blades, magic gadgets, or collapsible crossbows. You used whatever you could lift, sharpen, or conceal under ragged clothes. If luck smiled, and that meant a coin in a corpse's boot, you had a decent dagger. Not fancy, just sharp and clean enough to trust. Poisons existed, but not like the tales. They were crude, unpredictable, and often disgusting. Some killed fast, some slow, some just made people very sick and very paranoid. Ropes had their uses, climbing, tying, strangling, but if you didn't know your knots, things got awkward quick. Bows? Maybe, if you had one, could use it, and weren't sneaking it into a palace pretending to be a gardener. Most kills were close, silent, swift, and hopefully not slippery. You didn't get extras. If your blade failed or disappeared, you improvised. A tile, a nail, a belt buckle, whatever might work. You hid your tools anywhere they'd fit and kept them close, not out of caution, but because they were your lifeline, your only insurance. There were no enhancements, no fancy upgrades. You didn't shine your gear, you just hoped it didn't betray you at the worst moment. In the end, it wasn't the weapon that did the job. It was you, underprepared, under-equipped, and expected to perform wonders with whatever you had on hand. And your targets? Never nobodies. You weren't sent to deal with some drunk in an alley. Your marks were important. Nobility, clergy, military leaders, even royalty. And those types were protected. Dozens of guards, well-armed and alert. Some watched doors, others lurked in halls, all ready for trouble. You studied their routines, listened for creaking doors, timed every step to avoid detection. Then there were the fortresses themselves. No simple entrances, just walls, gates, and traps. Moats that bit. Arrow slits that watched. Boiling oil ready to greet the curious. Even if you got past the guards, the architecture itself wanted you dead. And don't forget the staff, the cooks, scribes, grooms, all eyes. One misstep, one suspicious glance, and someone was racing to raise the alarm. Even the stable boy could be the end of you. They weren't just dealing with blades, they were navigating rumors. In those times, whispers could travel faster than a sword swing if it meant someone avoided execution. Their intended victim, suspicious and with good reason. They were surrounded by schemers, ambitious relatives, and a sea of false smiles. Meals required tasters, sleep involved multiple locks, decoy beds, and shifting sleeping arrangements like a deadly version of hide and seek. Even if they attended a banquet, it wasn't your chance. Sure, they might drink, but so would you. You'd still face guards, dogs, a sharp-eyed jester, and dozens of witnesses. Just getting close could take weeks. Blending in as a servant, bribing the help, or hiding in containers. When the time came, there was only one chance for a silent, clean, and unnoticed strike. Fail and you'd be the next warning, dangling from the gate with a sarcastic sign. Forget the dramatic look. Real assassins looked more like unwell herders. Fashion wasn't a priority. They wore whatever they could find, oversized robes, tattered rags, or reused uniforms that reeked of their last owner. The key was to go unnoticed, which meant looking as ragged and exhausted as everyone else. What gave them away wasn't the outfit, but the way they nervously adjusted it to hide a blade. Masks weren't an option. Covering your face made you look diseased, which kept people away but also barred you from gatherings. If questioned, you had to improvise fast. I'm Brother Tobias, caretaker of silent prayer and roof repairs. Servants in noble houses were sharp. They noticed unfamiliar faces and clumsy hands. One mistake, and it was a quick knockout via candlestick. And if the disguise did fool people, the hard part began, staying in character, surrounded by tempting targets. No wigs, aging up or down meant dirt on the face, and glued-on beards that didn't survive close inspection. Disguises bought minutes, not safety. After that, vanish, bluff, or run. If caught, no one wanted to be found dressed as a nun with a sword in the bishop's laundry on a holy day. Being an assassin back then meant being alone. No partners, no gadget makers, no supportive network. Just you, a dull blade, and trust issues. Secret societies? More likely pub stories than reality. Meeting another assassin was rarer than seeing a ghost, and likely just as dangerous. Why so solitary? Because secrecy was survival. Every connection was a gamble. Even clients often didn't know your real name, and if they did, you were already planning to disappear. Companions were liabilities. Friends got curious. Lovers asked about scars, stains, and your habit of sleeping armed. You couldn't settle. One recognition in a marketplace could trigger a chase. Even criminals gave you space. You weren't a thief. They might share stories. You were the one who erased people. They feared you or considered you trouble. No one invited the assassin to dinner. You didn't complain. No one wanted to hear about sleepless nights after a quiet kill. Talk too much, and you were either insane or dangerous, so you kept quiet, kept armed, and stayed alone. In inns, you took the shadowed corner, watched the door, drank lightly, left early, and gave no names, at least none that were real. Being an assassin in that era meant mastering the art of disappearance. The skill of disappearing wasn't just about blending into a crowd, it meant vanishing from every life you never lived. Suppose you took the assignment. You mapped everything out, paid off the right people, dressed the part perfectly, say, as a chimney sweep. And then you froze. Maybe the mark noticed something. Maybe they were with their kid. Maybe your hand shook right when it mattered most. And just like that, you're finished. Because back then, failing at this job didn't mean a warning or a low score. It meant a public, excruciating death involving things like fire, ropes, and metal instruments with names that promised agony. Missing your mark didn't just mean a failed attempt, it meant blowing the entire operation. Your target lived, spread the word, and suddenly you weren't invisible. You were infamous. There was a description, a sketch, and your face tacked to every wall in town. Guards you once dodged now had orders and motivation, and you had more to fear than just your target. Your employer, the one who hired you, now saw you as a threat, a weak link, someone who might talk, someone to silence, quickly. There were no do-overs, no apologies, no second attempts. You had one shot, If you missed, the best-case scenario was dying before they figured out who paid you. And beyond death, there was disgrace, the quiet, unbearable kind. You hadn't just failed to kill, you'd failed to be flawless. And for people in this line of work, flawlessness was survival. Anything less was an invitation to your own execution. Past success didn't matter. Nobody cared how many times you got it right before. All that counted was this time. If you failed now, you'd better vanish for good. But let's say you did it. The plan clicked into place. The dagger hit its mark. No shouts, no guards, just one silent, sudden death. Well done, now run, because success didn't mean celebration. It meant escaping through filthy alleys with blood on your shoes and hounds on your trail. There was no time to bask in it, no toasts, no thanks, just immediate flight. The moment you struck, your new mission was survival. Exits had to be planned beforehand, paths, disguises, hideouts. Maybe someone owed you a favor, or at least didn't ask too many questions. Because once the alarm sounded, the city locked down. No one wanted scandal, which meant closed gates, checkpoints, and every guard armed with your rough description and a warning label. Even your employer might disappear if they hadn't already, because someone who just pulled off a hit was a dangerous liability. You had access, you had knowledge. That made you a threat even to your client. If they did pay, it was fast and impersonal, and then they were gone, hoping you would be too. You walked away with a handful of coins and a massive target on your back. Your reward: days of hiding, bribes, sleeping in barns, shaving in rivers, pretending to be a traveling monk named Brother Lucian. Because even if you succeeded, it wasn't over. It just meant starting again somewhere new, with more people hunting you than last time. Yes, you made the kill. Now run. And if the job itself wasn't already wretched, poor, pursued, and sleeping in goat-scented sheds, you had to live with everyone's paranoia. People didn't just fear assassins, they believed you were cursed. To most, you weren't a man. You were a shadowy thing that whispered to dark forces and smeared strange potions on your weapons. How else could you move unseen? Logic didn't matter, but superstition thrived. People claimed you could change shape. Some said you were invisible unless purified. One tale even claimed you could kill by breathing on a door. Walk through a village and someone might hiss, "Don't look at him, he'll hex the baby." Even your gear was suspect. That dagger? It was more than just a weapon. Clearly, it was created in some kind of cursed workshop. Poison was involved, but this wasn't chemistry. It was something darker, more arcane. And you probably mixed it using a severed toe under the glow of a blood moon. You might think fear would work in your favor, keep people at a distance. But the truth was worse. Superstitious crowds don't hesitate. They don't investigate. They grab stones, light fires, and yell things like, "Burn him before he calls down lightning." Your reputation didn't protect you, it made things worse. If someone died suddenly, illness, accident, choking on food, people would start whispering. Maybe it was the shadow man, maybe it was him. Just being in the same village as an unexplained death could get you hunted. That meant you had to keep moving, always. Stay in one place too long, and before you know it, a priest is ringing a bell, and a group of angry farmers are approaching with pitchforks like they've been waiting for this moment forever. And heaven help you if you were found with anything even slightly odd. Dried herbs, strange coins, or a foreign accent. That's all it took for someone to scream sorcerer and reach for a torch. In a world where monsters were believed to look just like everyone else, being too quiet, too intelligent, or too quick, made you dangerous. And in the logic of the times, dangers were eliminated swiftly and preferably in flames. Poison, the tool of the elegant killer, silent, clean, with no need for blades or noise, just a sip, a stagger, a sigh, and it's done. That's the theory. In reality, trying to poison someone in the Middle Ages was like entering a bar fight armed only with herbal tea and sarcasm. First, the substances weren't dependable. You didn't have pure toxins or convenient pills. You had plants, mushrooms, minerals, maybe the occasional toad. You had to collect them, crush them, and hope they worked. Even then, it might only give your target a mild stomachache and a newfound appreciation for security. There were no precise measurements. You couldn't dose accurately. You guessed. Too little and they just cancelled dinner. Too much, and you end up dead before they take the first bite. Kitchens were chaotic too. You couldn't just walk in and spike the stew. You had to bribe someone, impersonate a cook, or sneak in unnoticed. If you were unlucky, try to poison a meal that would be tested by multiple people and even a dog. Yes, a dog. Nobles didn't simply eat. They treated meals like battlefield strategy. Every dish was tasted, blessed, inspected. By the time it reached the noble, it had survived more scrutiny than a royal treaty. And even if you managed to slip in the poison, it went undetected, and the victim actually ate it. The outcome was still a gamble. Some poisons acted in hours, others in days. One moment they're laughing, the next they're clutching their stomach and demanding their astrologer. If they lived, guess who they blamed? Not the cook, not the tester. You, the quiet one, with the suspicious knowledge and shifty eyes. Poison wasn't efficient. It was unpredictable, dangerous, and full of risk. And if you were caught, you weren't given a swift end. You were tortured until you admitted to poisoning everyone, including the family dog. Even if you changed the course of history, removing a tyrant, derailing a bloodline, silencing a rival, no one remembered your name. Assassins weren't meant to be remembered. At best, you became a story, a figure in the shadows, a foreigner with a cold stare, a man who never finished his drink. You might pull off the century's most pivotal kill and still be written off as just another mysterious death in the records. That was the goal. The client didn't want fame. They wanted deniability. The fewer who knew, the safer they were. So your name vanished with the job. If you even used your real name, it disappeared. No signatures, no bragging, no trophies. You existed only for that one moment, and if anyone did know your identity, they were a liability. And in your trade, liabilities didn't last long. Honor? Forget it. There were no awards for silence, no memorials for the one who ended a war in the dark. Nobles built statues for themselves. You got a box, an anonymous grave, or if things went truly wrong, your head on a spike with traitor carved beneath. Sometimes your name lived on just to be cursed. A whispered warning, "Don't cross the throne. Remember what happened to Lord Ulrich?" And the one responsible, gone like smoke. That was your legacy, not glory, not even fear, just disappearance, meant to disappear without a trace. Your existence should have been forgotten. To be remembered was a death sentence, because in that era, heroes lived on in stories, but assassins were wiped from memory. Yet you endured. You completed the mission. You even got your reward, a rarity in itself. Now the plan is simple. Stay hidden, keep quiet, and hope the one who hired you keeps their word and shields your identity. Logical? Number. Because in that world, one rule outweighed even the command to stay hidden. Never place your faith in anyone, especially your employer. Whether they were aristocrats, traders, or corrupt clergy, they didn't seek your services out of admiration. They had a problem, and you were the most effective, least traceable solution. But once the task was finished, your knowledge became a threat. You knew too much: who wanted whom dead, when, and for how much. That made you dangerous, not just to your target, but to your client as well. So what happened? They disappeared, denied any involvement, or worse, dispatched another blade to silence you. Sometimes they planned it all. One killer for the deed, another to clean up. Safer for them. No refunds, just minimized risk. If you attempted blackmail, that was bold. And your final act, because those in power didn't bargain with blades, they eliminated them. If you were lucky, and luck was rare, you got your coin and were left alone. But even then, you had to assume they were watching, already preparing for the day you became a liability again. You were a loose end, a whisper with a knife. Success didn't earn you trust, it earned you scrutiny, because if you killed once, you could kill again. And no one wanted to be your next mark. Suppose you made it through, survived betrayals, poisons, ambushes, and worse. Outlasted enemies, employers, even your own conscience. What then, a peaceful retirement? Hardly. There were no gentle endings for those in your trade, no golden farewells or seaside hideaways. You didn't retire, you disappeared or died, often both. The reason was clear. You were never truly out. Your past lingered, every secret, every name, every corpse a weight on your soul. People didn't want you living quietly. They wanted you erased. Even if no one hunted you down, and that was unlikely, you lived in constant fear that someone would. A younger assassin, eager to make a name, could be sent to find the ghost of someone dangerous. So you changed names, moved to a nameless village, faked a limp, sold herbs, claimed you were once a guard. Still, you never truly rested. Crowds made you nervous. You sat with your back to the wall. You kept your blade hidden near coins you never spent, tainted by their origin. You couldn't even trust yourself. Years of bloodshed altered you. Every knock was a threat, every traveler a risk. You forgot how to dream. Dreams were unsafe. Love was impossible. Laughter risky. You weren't living. You were haunting your own life. Because for an assassin of that age, there was no final chapter, just a quiet drift into obscurity, always moving, always wary, until one day you disappeared for good, and no one remembered. And maybe that was all you could hope for. Because by now the truth is clear that life wasn't thrilling, it wasn't noble, and it rarely paid well. It was harsh, thankless, brief, marked by violence and followed by death. You wouldn't last, not a week, maybe not a day. You'd come in thinking you were sharp, stealthy, in control. But you'd end up cold, starving, and one mistake from hanging. You'd enter a town, confident and ready, only to find the target gone, the guards alert, and the informant bought out for scraps. You'd hesitate, hit the wrong mark, be seen by someone who'd remember your face. And just like that, your time would be up. You're not elusive, you're the issue. So what happens next? You flee. But you're unfamiliar with the rugged, ancient roads, thick mud, unstable cobblestones, and a ridiculous number of stray chickens blocking your path. You slip, fall, and end up tackled by a guard named Thomas, who's heartbroken and eager for a fight. Suppose you make it through that. Then comes the fallout. You're left isolated, disgraced, and without direction. Only rumors trail behind you, along with the grim awareness that even if you prevail, the most you can hope for is to grow old and die in obscurity, hidden under a false identity in a superstitious village. You wouldn't survive, and truthfully, you were never meant to. The life of an assassin wasn't glamorous. It was a harsh system that destroyed people and left behind only shadows. It promised power, but gave no peace, offered purpose without belonging. You didn't become part of history. You disappeared from it. And the only thing waiting for you was silence, a silence no one questioned, because no one remembered you had ever existed. Before she ruled as Queen of Macedonia, she was known as Myrtale, a princess from the rugged tribal lands of Epirus. Her lineage was said to trace back to Achilles himself. Whether that claim was true, one thing was clear: she was not meant to be a bystander in history. From early on, she was surrounded by mystery and ritual. Her life was shaped as much by prophecy and ecstatic rites as by politics, immersed in ancient beliefs and divine reverence. She wasn't the kind of princess who sat quietly, smiling behind embroidery hoops. No, she was drawn to omens, serpents, and the wild ceremonies of Dionysian worship, where women danced under the moon and summoned the divine in trance. Her faith wasn't a performance, it was visceral. She didn't just revere the gods, she became one with them. Ancient sources, likely penned by men both fascinated and fearful, claimed she kept sacred snakes in her chambers and even let them share her bed. Whether that was true or an invention born of fear and myth, the idea endured. To supporters, it made her divine. To enemies, dangerous. Her real influence didn't begin on battlefields or in royal halls, but in shadowy rituals, among whispers of priestesses and the winding bodies of snakes. She wasn't merely a royal figure, she was a living oracle, bound to something older than politics, colder than steel. So when the cunning and ambitious Philip II of Macedon visited the island of Samothrace for a sacred rite, he encountered more than just a beautiful young woman. He met a mystery he couldn't ignore. Their union wasn't just strategic, it was a fateful convergence of prophecy and power. From the start, it was surrounded by omens, lightning said to split the sky on their wedding night, visions of thunderbolts entering her womb. These stories would grow into legend. But what's certain is that their marriage didn't just produce a child, it brought forth Alexander the Great. And from the moment he was born, she was determined to guide his destiny. Her marriage to Philip wasn't the idyllic tale one might expect for the future mother of an empire. It was forged in fire of prophecy, pride, and constant suspicion. Philip, a man of fierce ambition and relentless desire, took her as his bride around 357 BCE. She was likely still in her teens, but far from innocent. She recognized in him a partner whose dreams matched her own, and possibly a divine counterpart to her spiritual path. Macedon was no easy place. It was a land of ambition and betrayal, where royal blood was spilled by family and power was taken by force. But she entered it boldly, a priestess with her gaze fixed firmly on the crown. Their relationship was volatile. Philip, ever strategic, continued to marry others, each union a grab for power. But she never faded into the background. She cultivated her own influence, her own alliances, and often sought answers from oracles and rites, possibly even concerning Philip's fate. Then came the birth of their son, a moment cloaked in divine drama. Legends tell of dreams involving thunderbolts, flames dancing around the newborn, and Philip envisioning a lion sealing her womb. Whether they believed these omens or crafted them to justify their ambitions, they acted as though Alexander was born to rule the world. But while the child rose in glory, the marriage unraveled. She deeply resented Philip's other wives, especially Cleopatra Eurydice, a Macedonian who posed a real threat. This wasn't just personal, it was political. Any child Cleopatra bore would be a direct challenge to her own son's right to rule. More respected by the local elite, she posed a serious threat to Alexander's future. Olympia understood this well. The palace was more than a residence, it was a battlefield. She would wield every tool at her disposal, symbols, dreams, rituals, rumors, to ensure her son wasn't just remembered, but crowned. She had shed her former identity. Now she embodied Olympus itself, and anyone seeking her son's throne would face her fury. By Alexander's adolescence, the royal court in Pella had transformed into a theatre of subtle insults, strategic alliances, and bitter rivalries. Olympus wasn't merely seeking influence, she was fighting for survival. She was acutely aware that the palace was teeming with snakes, but she was the one who had taught them to strike. Philip II had started to drift away from her. He spent more time campaigning, indulged in drink, and increasingly relied on his Macedonian advisors. The ultimate betrayal came when he married a young noblewoman named Cleopatra Eurydice, not to be confused with the Egyptian queen of the same name. This Cleopatra, a native Macedonian, was the niece of Attalus, one of Philip's senior generals. For Olympia, this wasn't just infidelity, it was an act of war. The wedding feast was a catastrophe. Attalus, in a drunken state, insulted both Olympia and Alexander, casting doubt on Alexander's legitimacy. Was he truly Philip's son, or the offspring of a deity, as Olympia liked to claim? Intended as mockery, the remark only empowered Olympia. She embraced the divine myth. Let them talk. Let them believe Zeus had touched her son. It made him untouchable. Alexander stormed away from the feast, and Olympia withdrew to Epirus. But this retreat was calculated, not a defeat. In her homeland, she retained her royal status and could gather allies, sow discord, and observe as rot crept through Philip's court. Her absence did not diminish her influence. Then came the upheaval. Philip was assassinated at his daughter's wedding on the brink of his Persian campaign, just as he was preparing to elevate himself beyond kingship to something even greater. One question reverberated through the palace. Who was responsible? Was it Pausanias, the aggrieved bodyguard? A result of internal scheming? Alexander himself? Or, whispered by many, Olympia? No proof ever surfaced, but suspicion lingered. Days later, Cleopatra Eurydice and her infant were dead, rumoured victims of Olympia's vengeance. The serpent had returned. With Philip gone and the kingdom in disarray, Olympia acted decisively. While others hesitated, she moved swiftly and ruthlessly. Cleopatra Eurydice was removed, not just killed, but humiliated, her death made into a grim spectacle. Some say she was forced to take her own life after witnessing the murder of her child. Others claim the child was killed in front of her. What's certain is that no mercy was shown. Olympia understood what many court mothers failed to. Mercy could be fatal. Any rival child represented a future war, and she was done being defensive. With that bloodline eliminated, her focus shifted to solidifying Alexander's claim. Her son, still young but brilliant and trained by Aristotle, was declared king with little resistance. But this wasn't due to charm or legacy alone. It was Olympia's doing. She knew who to intimidate, who to placate, and who to eliminate quietly. She wasn't just safeguarding Alexander's rise, she orchestrated it. Alexander reportedly disapproved of the bloodshed surrounding Cleopatra's family. Yet he did nothing to stop it, likely recognizing the truth his mother had always known: Power comes at a cost, and in Macedon, blood was currency. With Alexander crowned, Olympia began to retreat from the spotlight, not into obscurity, but into a different kind of power. As Alexander readied his Persian campaign, she remained in Macedon, not as a passive figurehead, but as the spiritual anchor of his destiny. She sent him sacred items, consulted seers, and performed rites in his name. To her, his mission wasn't merely military, it was sacred. Alexander wasn't just waging war, he was fulfilling fate. And as long as she lived, no enemy, Macedonian, Persian, or otherwise, would threaten that fate. She had secured his crown, purged the palace, and now watched over the empire from the shadows. As Alexander marched east to conquer, Olympia stayed behind, a queen in title only, but wielding real power. Though the regency officially belonged to Antipater, one of Alexander's commanders, she would not be sidelined. She continued to write to her son, guiding and advising him from afar. She often warned and reprimanded him. These were not affectionate messages from a loving mother, but sharp political analyses filled with prophecy and malice. Even from far away, Alexander read each one. She reminded him of his true enemies, cast doubt on the loyalty of his associates, and criticized his adoption of Persian customs, his marital choices, and his hints at divinity. No one else dared confront him with such accusations, but she never feared speaking as both a mother and a vessel of divine will. Back in Macedon, Antipater's resentment grew. She constantly worked against him, leveraging her status, spiritual influence, and familial connections to rally opposition. She held sway in Epirus, Thessaly, and among the elite. Her rumors spread quickly, and with her, even a whisper could be lethal. Meanwhile, her letters to Alexander grew increasingly urgent, accusing Antipater of aspiring to betray him, comparing him to Philip. Whether out of genuine belief or fear of losing influence, she kept urging her son to act. But Alexander delayed. He needed Antipater to maintain control in Greece during his campaigns in Asia. Thus, the divide between mother and general deepened. She waited, watching, but beneath her outward piety and maternal concern, her patience waned. She hadn't endured the intrigues of court life to be sidelined by a seasoned commander. As Alexander's empire stretched from the Aegean to India, she noticed its foundations cracking. He was overwhelmed, overly reliant on foreign advisers, and drifting from both her and the gods. She believed his success stemmed from divine will, and from her. If he forgot that, she believed the divine would remind him, even if he was her own son. When word of Alexander's death in Babylon reached Macedon in 323 BCE, it wasn't a grand announcement. It was a quiet, devastating blow. For her, it wasn't just the death of a child, it was the collapse of the world she had helped create. Her son, the force of nature she had foretold, raised and unleashed, was gone. He left behind no heir apparent, only disorder. His generals were already tearing the empire apart. Antipater still held control in Greece and Macedon, and held no affection for her. Meanwhile, her daughter Cleopatra was being pursued by rival commanders aiming to use her lineage as leverage for power. She foresaw the inevitable civil war. Once more she prepared to intervene, but now she no longer had Alexander. What remained was his bloodline, his young son Alexander IV, born to Roxana, the Bactrian princess. Both mother and child, still in Macedon, were vulnerable. She realized the child was not just a legacy, but a target and a potential tool. She allied with Roxana, determined to protect the child and wield his heritage in the escalating power struggle. Yet the power dynamics had shifted. The generals, once loyal to Alexander, now served only themselves. They had their own armies, ambitions, and grudges. Still, she did not back down. She had faced betrayal, danger, and kings before. Warlords and usurpers would not intimidate her. She began to plot again. When Antipater died, his son Cassander took his place, a cold, ruthless man with no patience for her machinations. The stage was set for confrontation, the formidable mother of Alexander and the calculating new power rising against her. Alexander was gone, but his legacy lingered, and she remained entwined within it, poised to act. Years after his death, as civil war tore through the empire, she made her boldest move. She returned to Macedon, not as a mourner, but as a force of divine vengeance. With the regency fractured and Cassander consolidating power, Roxana and the boy were effectively captives. She knew their time was running out. So she struck a deal with Polyperchon, an aging but still legitimate military leader. She would not return to plead, but to command. With his support, she entered Macedon at the head of an army. Her arrival changed everything. Cities welcomed her, soldiers defected, even past adversaries hesitated. Her name alone carried weight. Then she exacted retribution. One by one, she eliminated Cassander's loyalists. When she captured Philip III Aridaeus, Alexander's mentally impaired half-brother, and a figurehead king, she ordered his execution. Some accounts say his wife, Eurydice, was also taken and given a choice to end her own life or face what came next. When she refused, they had her strangled. It was a ruthless act disguised in royal formalities, staged like divine justice. The message was unmistakable. Only Alexander's bloodline was fit to rule. All others were impostors. For a fleeting but fierce moment, she seized control. She revived the dynasty, sought vengeance for past betrayals, and demonstrated what sovereign power looked like when wielded by a woman with nothing left to lose. But in Macedon, power was as volatile as flame on dry grass. Her rival was still out there, calculated, patient, and ruthless. He returned stronger, with greater numbers, deeper resources, and a colder resolve. Her support dwindled. Allies lost their grip. The tide shifted. Isolated in the fortress of Pydna, she watched as enemies closed in. She had ignited the blaze, and now the smoke thickened while adversaries gathered. Once the most formidable woman of the ancient world, she was now besieged, alone, encircled by the forces determined to end what had begun long ago. But she didn't plead. For nearly a year, she endured the siege with the unyielding presence of a figure carved from divine fury. Supplies dwindled, disease spread, allies disappeared. Yet inside those walls she remained unmoved, embodying the same force that once unseated kings. She held herself not as a captive, but as the mother of a god. Her enemy hesitated. Even now her myth carried weight. Ending her life risked sacrilege. An offer of safety was made in exchange for surrender. But she knew better. Promises from rulers were too often broken. Hunger became lethal. Her forces surrendered. And at last she was handed over. He didn't execute her himself. That would have been too swift, too easy. Instead, he delivered her to the families of those she had condemned. They sentenced her. Yet when the moment came, no one would land the first strike. She stood, dignified and silent, her gaze unflinching. They had grown up on stories of her visions and rituals, once cheering her son as a deity. Now, none dared move. Outsiders were summoned, people who knew only orders, not legends. And so she was executed, without ceremony, without dignity, in silence. Her death ended any real power held by Alexander's bloodline. The last spark of an empire born from divine ambition was extinguished, yet her shadow endured. History did not forget the Serpent Queen. She perished not on a throne, but in the dirt, weaponless and abandoned by those she had ruled. But history is strange. It does not always honor those who die in luxury. Sometimes it remembers those who went down fighting, and she was never meant for a quiet legacy. In life, she wielded motherhood as a weapon and prophecy as armor. She wasn't merely Alexander's mother, she helped create his legend. Without her, there would be no divine child myth, no thunderbolt omens, no blood-stained rise to power. She did not just birth an empire, she defended it fiercely, Unlike other rulers who led armies or charged into battle, her war was waged in shadows. She used alliances, rituals, fear, and belief. She made people believe her son was divine, and perhaps believed it herself. Her enemies called her a murderer, a witch, a manipulator, and they were right. She was shaped by a brutal world that valued cunning over kindness, and learned early that mercy was a luxury rulers couldn't afford. Through the centuries, she was reviled and revered. Some saw her as a villain, others as a visionary. But none could dismiss her. She lingered in Alexander's legacy like a ghost, always present, always just out of sight. And maybe that was her place, not as a tragic figure or side note in a king's tale, but as a force in her own right, a story unto herself. She was foretold in prophecy, lay among serpents, and endured beyond the gods themselves. Though her remains have long since crumbled to dust, her legend persists in every story of merciless queens, every murmur of fated bloodlines, and every empire rooted in myth. She remains hidden in shadow, watching. South of the modern city of Heracleion, on the sun-drenched island of Crete, lie ruins that feel more like a memory than a structure. Stone corridors wind endlessly, chambers curve and repeat, staircases ascend to nowhere. Even now it's easy to lose your bearings. This place is Knossos, once the center of the Minoan world and likely the origin of one of humanity's most enduring legends, the labyrinth. But before it became myth, it was a palace, an extraordinary one. Constructed around 1900 BCE and expanded over centuries, Knos was more than a royal home. It was a city housed under one massive roof, stretching across nearly 150,000 square feet. It included over 1,000 rooms, skylights, storage halls, shrines, workshops, and possibly the earliest flushing toilets known to history. It had running water, multi-level living spaces, and a sophisticated air system. Far from a crude stronghold, it was a marvel of design. To modern archaeologists, Knos appears as organized disorder. To ancient eyes, it likely seemed enchanted. It was brought into modern recognition by British archaeologist Arthur Evans, who began excavations in the early 20th century. He soon believed this was the birthplace of the labyrinth myth. The maze-like layout, the deeply symbolic architecture, and the omnipresent imagery of bulls, painted, carved, or cast, supported his theory. Bulls were sacred to the Minoans. Evans even named the civilization after the legendary king Minos. Whether Minos truly existed, the myth became inseparable from the site. Yet no literal labyrinth has ever been found, no underground maze, no prison for a hybrid beast. What exists is something subtler and perhaps more enigmatic, a city built in spirals, wings, and layers, intentionally hard to navigate. The deeper one explores, the blurrier the line between reality and legend becomes. So the question lingers. Did the mythic beast emerge from within these walls, or was the palace the real monster? Nos may never give up its secrets easily, but it compels the right questions. The story is as iconic as the ruins, a creature, half man and half bull, trapped in a maze so intricate that no one escaped until the hero Theseus did, aided by a thread and a cunning princess. But where did this myth begin, and why focus on a labyrinth? Early versions speak of a powerful king on Crete who demanded a grim tribute from Athens, 7 boys and 7 girls to be fed to the Minotaur, a creature born from divine disgrace. The Minotaur, confined in a dark maze, represented the savage core of power masked by grandeur. To ancient Greeks, Crete represented wealth, mystery, and awe. The seafaring Minoans appeared both refined and foreign. Their rites featured bull leaping, their art strange gods, their palaces unlike anything on the mainland. To a Greek visitor in 1000 BCE, Nos may have felt like a separate world. The bull was central to Minoan belief. Frescoes show youths leaping over charging bulls in ceremonial acts. Stylized horns crowned buildings and altars. Add in a palace that seems like a maze, and the foundation for myth is clear. But what if the Minotaur wasn't just a beast, but a symbol? Some researchers suggest the tale reflects memories of Crete's dominance over Athens, a time when tribute was paid to a stronger, stranger force. The labyrinth could represent political entrapment. The Minotaur, the fierce power behind Minoan rule. Others see psychological layers, the labyrinth as a symbol of the subconscious, the Minotaur as buried impulses. Theseus, the hero, journeys inward, guided only by memory. The myth and Nos remain entangled. It is the closest thing we've found to a real labyrinth. No monster, no princess, but maybe something deeper. Not just a legend echoing history, but history itself yearning to become legend. Long before Athens rose with its white temples or Sparta honed its blades, the Minoan civilization thrived, one of Europe's earliest complex societies. Their influence spread not through war, but through commerce, artistry, and an almost uncanny mastery of structure. At their center stood Knossos, not just a royal seat, but a cultural, spiritual, and economic hub. From around 2600 to 1400 BCE, the Minoans flourished on Crete, building a vast trade network that stretched to Egypt, Mesopotamia, the Levant, and even distant coasts. Spain's vessels sliced through the Mediterranean like silent arrows bearing pottery, saffron, bronze, and luxury wares. Rather than fielding massive armies, they forged alliances, relationships that proved far more lucrative than arms. What stands out about Minoan culture is how unlike their later Greek heirs they were. Their art honored nature, animals, and the grace of the human form instead of focusing on warfare or divine retribution. Frescoes depict dancers, dolphins, and athletes vaulting over bulls. Their goddesses, too, are strikingly unique, powerful, bare-breasted figures clutching snakes, emblems of fertility, transformation, or protection. At the heart of it all lay Knossos, not an impregnable fortress on a hill, but a sprawling complex in a lush valley. Lacking massive defensive walls, it suggests the Minoans either felt no threat on their island or wielded such influence that defense was superfluous. Their boldness manifested architecturally. Multi-story structures, colonnaded courtyards, and sophisticated plumbing revealed a civilization centuries ahead of its time. Yet despite their advances, the Minoans left no deciphered writings. Their primary script, Linear A, remains a mystery. We don't know what they called themselves, what their rulers believed, or what prayers they whispered within Knossos' walls. All that survives are ruins, artwork, and echoes absorbed later by Mycenaeans and reflected in Greek mythology. The Minoans were more than palace builders. They crafted enigma. Knossos was not merely a structure, but the pulsating core of a civilization that shimmered briefly like sunlight on the Aegean before vanishing. Though some say its spirit still roams the labyrinthine corridors. To wander Knossos is to traverse layered, mesmerizing time. It isn't just the grand scale that astonishes, it's the layout. Rooms open into rooms, passageways branch and disappear. Light shafts pierce the interior. Staircases spiral into gloom or burst into sunlit atriums. No straight path exists. It's easy to understand why ancient travelers murmured labyrinth. Knossos functioned like a living entity, sprawling over roughly 150,000 square feet with over 1,000 chambers, tiny workshops, storerooms, shrines, apartments, throne rooms, all organized around a central courtyard that likely hosted public ceremonies or bull-leaping rituals. Constructed across multiple levels, up to 5 stories in places, on natural slopes and man-made terraces, navigating without a guide required memory, instinct, or a thread like Theseus's. Beneath the seeming chaos lay ingenious design. Passive ventilation via air shafts and open stairwells cooled rooms. Rainwater was channeled through clay pipes. Indoor toilets flushed long before Rome adopted the practice. One of the most famous spaces is the so-called throne room, named for its alabaster seat built into the wall and flanked by benches, surrounded by frescoes of griffins, mythic protectors. Was it the court of a priest-king, a goddess's sanctuary, or a sacred tribunal? No one can say. Its walls speak in vivid pigments, dolphins swimming above baths, women in flounced skirts with bare torsos, youths mid-vault over bulls. This art was identity, fluid, natural, bound to sea and earth. Venture deeper and Knossos' disorientation grows. Certain sections seem deliberately intricate, designed to confound, perhaps the origin of the labyrinth legend. Not a monster's prison, but a palace alive with ritual, spectacle, and a hint of dread. No locked doors or mythical beasts, just architecture that makes you doubt where you stand and wonder what lies around the corner. Knossos wasn't simply an administrative hub or royal residence. It was a temple of Minoan spirit, steeped in ritual, myth, and divine secrecy. Unlike later Greek temples with soaring columns and marble shrines, Knossos' spirituality was woven into its very fabric. Shrines lurked in hidden corners, pillars rose like sentinels, stylized horns adorned rooftops and altars. Everywhere, the bull motif prevailed, symbolizing a deep bond between worship, nature, and this sacred animal. The Minoans revered, not feared, the bull. Their famous bull-leaping fresco likely depicts a religious rite. Young men and women vaulting over a charging bull in a ritual dance of peril and grace, sacred theatre, perhaps an offering to deities or a symbol of triumph over chaos. Then there are the snake goddess figurines unearthed in storerooms beneath the palace, bare-breasted women arms raised, serpents coiled around them. These figures radiate authority. They are household guardians, symbols of fertility and life. To the Minoans, snakes embodied renewal, rebirth, and mystery, creatures bridging earth and underworld. The rooms housing these treasures hint at domestic shrines or ritual spaces, underscoring how deeply faith was interwoven with daily life. Quiet spaces, hidden sacred nooks nestled within the bustling core of the palace, created a sense of reverence. With its frescoes, ceremonial horns, altars, and winding passageways, the entire structure felt like a ritual apparatus, built not merely for habitation, but as a conduit to the divine. There was no distinct temple because the palace itself functioned as one. Its architecture, artistry, and layout reflected a spiritual perspective in which the sacred and the everyday were inseparable. It was a realm where mythology shaped the walls, where hallways could serve as sacred paths, and each echo might have once been a prayer. This place didn't just shelter people, it was also a dwelling for deities. For generations, it symbolized prosperity, progress, and cultural refinement, until an abrupt and still mysterious turn of events around 1400 BCE left it deserted. The vibrant frescoes were left to fade, and the once dominant civilization disappeared like mist over the sea. The reasons remain debated. One theory attributes it to natural disaster, specifically the cataclysmic eruption of Thera around 1600 BCE, which unleashed powerful tsunamis and darkened the skies with ash, likely damaging agriculture and destabilizing the region. Although the palace survived initially, the long-term impact may have unraveled its foundations across all spheres of life. Others suggest the influence of rising mainland powers. By 1450 BCE, evidence indicates that new rulers, possibly from the Greek mainland, took hold. The cultural markers shifted, martial themes emerged in the art, and a new script replaced the old one. The once vibrant complex now echoed in a foreign language. This transition may not have come through a single invasion, but a gradual process of trade, influence, and eventual control. Internal turmoil, such as civil unrest or political collapse, might have also played a role. Notably, the site shows little evidence of violent destruction, no charred remains, no mass graves. The end came quietly. The palace simply ceased to function, its corridors fell silent, the ceremonies stopped, and nature reclaimed the space. By the time the region appeared in epic tales, it was already shrouded in legend, a fading echo of kings and creatures, labyrinths and lore. In the end, its fall may not have been the result of any single event, but the inevitable passage of time and the rise of new powers. Yet its remnants endure, and deep beneath the soil, the structure still seems to breathe with forgotten voices. For millennia, the palace lay hidden beneath layers of earth, its name and stories fading into obscurity, until one man pursued a legend. In 1900, a British archaeologist named Sir Arthur Evans acquired the land, spurred by discoveries from local farmers who had unearthed unusual artifacts. What Evans uncovered was a monumental and sophisticated complex, which he believed to be the mythical seat of King Minos. The peculiar design, vivid frescoes, and symbolic motifs convinced him he had found the labyrinth itself. Evans went beyond excavation. He interpreted, restored, and in some cases reimagined the site, blending archaeological rigor with dramatic flair. He coined the name for the ancient builders and used modern materials to reconstruct parts of the ruins, a controversial approach viewed alternately as inspired or invasive. What stands today is a mixture of ancient remnants and early 20th century vision. Still, his work transformed understanding of a forgotten Bronze Age civilization. one marked by artistic depth and maritime sophistication. His discoveries, including an undeciphered script, sparked fresh questions about early writing and cultural complexity. Evans did more than uncover ruins. He revived a myth, revealing a civilization more intricate and human than the legend suggested. In waking the palace from its long slumber, he unearthed a narrative both haunting and extraordinary. To walk its corridors now is to move through a language written in images, frescoes, carvings, and repeating patterns. Yet without a decipherable text like the Rosetta Stone, the deeper meanings remain elusive. Is this conversation helpful so far? Stone. Their main script, Linear A, has never been deciphered. Instead of reading their words, we see their messages painted on plaster, carved into stone, and woven into patterns. What were they trying to convey? The art of this place is unmatched in the ancient world. There's no fixation on warfare, no lines of monarchs or battle-worn champions. Instead, we see nature, dolphins leaping, lilies in bloom, birds soaring, and sacred bulls. The people are vibrant, graceful, often shown dancing or taking part in rituals. Even scenes hinting at peril are filled with rhythm and grace. These people weren't recording military victories. They seemed to be celebrating the cycles of life and perhaps the order of the cosmos. The most well-known emblem is the double axe, or la brise. It appears everywhere, on walls, in shrines, etched into stonework. This symbol is thought to be spiritual in nature, perhaps connected to female deities or astronomical rhythms. Some believe the term labyrinth itself comes from labris, suggesting the labyrinth was never a maze, but a sacred space, house of the double axe. Another significant symbol is the horns of consecration, stylized bull horns placed atop structures and altars. These likely marked sacred from secular space. Along with repeated images of bulls and bull-leaping rituals, it's clear the animal had deep symbolic importance. Whether it stood for nature, fertility, chaos, or divinity is still debated, but its presence is constant. Even the layout of the central site may hold symbolic value. Some experts think it was designed not just for utility, but to reflect cosmic or seasonal cycles. Its complex passages and layered chambers might symbolize a journey through life, through death, through the underworld, a spiritual maze rather than a literal prison. Yet without a readable script, any conclusion teeters between educated guess and creative speculation. These people communicated in images, not narratives, leaving us to interpret. What is this place trying to say? We hear its rhythms, see its imagery, but the meaning remains elusive, like a myth unraveling just beyond our grasp. Though now in ruins, it doesn't feel lifeless. Walk through its halls today, and you'll sense something pulsing just below the surface, not spirits or gods, but the echoes of stories, lives, and enduring mysteries. Long after its fall, it still captivates. Visitors wander its paths, researchers seek answers, and storytellers draw inspiration from its shadows. The Minotaur might be legend, but the feeling of the labyrinth is very real. We don't know who ruled here, what their names were, or what beliefs they held, but we know they cherished beauty, they revered nature, they understood harmony between art and architecture, between ceremony and daily life. And they came before all, before the Parthenon, before Rome, before Hebrew temples and Persian courts. There was this place, a palace that was also a city that was also a shrine that may have been a tale. Maybe that's the true essence of the labyrinth, not a trap or a riddle, but a narrative shaped in stone, a myth made physical. The legend of the Minotaur didn't appear from nowhere. It grew from this place, from its complex layout, its bull-centered rituals, its overwhelming presence. The Greeks told it as a myth. We study it through archaeology, but it has always been both. Today, we can walk its remains in the open, take pictures, map it out, even reconstruct its murals. Yet the mystery lingers. The boundary between truth and legend still shimmers like heat over ancient rock. Perhaps that's why it continues to captivate us, because it doesn't give us all the answers. It shows us that some histories aren't meant to be solved, they're meant to be experienced. And this site, ancient, intricate, half-remembered, isn't just a location, it's a question. One that draws us in step by step. And like Theseus, we're still following the thread. Ancient engineers had clear intentions. Early battering rams were simple. Crews hoisted a log and slammed it into enemy walls like wild lumberjacks. But with time, the ram evolved. Builders found that enclosing it in a wheeled frame, often roofed, to protect its operators, transformed it from a crude tool into a fearsome siege weapon. The Assyrians, masters of siegecraft, used rams to instill fear. Their siege towers combined rams with archery platforms, allowing them to destroy gates while bombarding defenders from above. Carvings from ancient cities depict iron-tipped rams rolling steadily toward rebellious gates, unstoppable forces of devastation. These machines weren't limited to gates, they also targeted weak walls, toppled towers, and collapsed fortifications. Their presence sent a clear message: yield or see your defenses crumble. The Greeks improved upon them, the Romans perfected them. Roman innovations produced giant rams known as Ares, Latin for ram, suspended for maximum force. Bound structure on wheels, towering with multiple levels, bristling with archers and soldiers, these mobile fortresses allowed attackers to approach high walls while staying protected from enemy fire. Once close enough, a drawbridge at the top would lower, creating a bridge from the tower to the wall, enabling troops to storm the battlements directly. Siege towers required level ground and tremendous effort to move, often needing entire teams to push them into position. Defenders responded with flaming arrows, rolling boulders, or by undermining the earth to collapse the towers. But when they worked, siege towers were formidable. They turned fortress walls into front doors. Together, these machines reshaped the battlefield. Rams brought brute force, catapults brought calculated terror, trebuchets delivered massive destruction from above, and siege towers provided direct invasion. Each was a testament to the ingenuity and ruthlessness of ancient and medieval engineers who turned raw physics into instruments of conquest. A towering structure mounted on wheels and covered in wet animal hides to guard against flames, bristling with archers and spearmen, that was the siege tower. It functioned as both a mobile fortress and an armored transport. When one of these lumbered toward a city's defenses, it signaled the start of true combat. Siege towers were anything but discreet. Their sheer size and formidable presence made them a terrifying force when deployed effectively. Though first employed by the Assyrians in the 9th century BCE, it was the Greeks and Hellenistic states that elevated the design to dramatic proportions. In 305 BCE, during the Siege of Rhodes, the Macedonian commander Demetrius constructed a 9-story behemoth named the Taker of Cities. Towering over 100 feet, clad in iron, armed with catapults and propelled by thousands of troops, it eventually collapsed under its own mass, but the scale of its construction was unprecedented. The concept behind siege towers was straightforward. Walls protect only when they can't be bypassed. These towers neutralize that protection by offering attackers a raised platform to descend directly onto ramparts, sidestepping gates and ladders. From the upper levels, archers could bombard defenders while soldiers below readied for assault. Yet these machines had vulnerabilities. They were sluggish, struggled in muddy terrain, and were prime targets for fire, rolling stones, or obstructed pathways. Defenders often dug trenches, flooded ditches, or built additional inner barriers to halt their advance. Despite their flaws, when siege towers succeeded, they did so with dramatic impact. Breaching a wall was one thing. Suddenly having enemies on the ramparts was utter chaos. Siege towers shifted battles from ground-level clashes to vertical contests for survival. They turned height into both an advantage and a risk. Once the ramp dropped onto the walls, there was no retreat, only brutal, close-quarters combat. While battering rams crashed and projectiles soared, some of the most destructive strategies occurred quietly, beneath the surface. Subterranean warfare, or sapping, involved undermining a fortress by removing the earth supporting it. This ancient and effective tactic entailed tunneling under a wall, propping the shaft with wood, then igniting the supports. As the wood burned away, the tunnel caved in, bringing the wall down with it. Entire fortifications could suddenly crumble. Though it lacked the grandeur of siege engines, tunneling was a silent, deadly force. While early versions were used by ancient powers, the technique was perfected by the Greeks, Persians, and later medieval forces. In 429 BCE, during the Siege of Plateau, the attackers dug beneath the defences, only to be met mid-tunnel by countermining defenders, leading to dark, cramped combat underground. This method of intercepting enemy tunnels became known as countermining and added a chilling element to sieges, soldiers listening for the faint sound of picks in the earth, ready to dig toward their enemies for brutal, torch-lit skirmishes. There was no glory, just suffocation, fear, and filth. But when successful, the outcome was devastating. In 1212, during the siege of Rochester Castle, attackers tunneled under a wall, packed the shaft with pig fat, and ignited it. The resulting collapse destroyed a major tower and led to the defenders' surrender. By the 13th century, siege engineers had become experts in soil composition and structural vulnerabilities, turning undermining into a precise and terrifying science. They combined the skills of geology and demolition, proving that if a wall couldn't be scaled or breached, it could be brought down from underneath. Siege warfare wasn't only defined by the attackers' innovations. Defenders also had lethal strategies of their own, and some were fearsome. Among the most terrifying was a flammable substance developed in the 7th century CE known as Greek fire, a viscous, incendiary material that continued to burn even on water. It could be launched through tubes or thrown in containers, engulfing ships, fortifications, and soldiers in flames. Its exact composition remains unknown, lost with the fall of its creators, but its destructive reputation endures. Other defensive tactics were less high-tech, but equally brutal. Boiling liquids, such as water, oil, or sand, were poured through openings in ceilings called murder holes onto attackers below. Boiling oil was particularly dreaded, clinging to skin and saturating clothing before being ignited. Climbing a siege ladder only to be met by flames impossible to extinguish was a nightmare all its own. Even hot sand, though less theatrical, inflicted brutal damage, slipping into armor seams at the neck or wrists, searing the flesh beneath and causing severe burns. It didn't look threatening from afar, but it could reduce brave soldiers to shrieking ruins in moments. Defenders also weaponized basic physics. Gravity served as an ally. Massive stones, logs, even corpses were hurled from high walls to crush siege engines or dense formations below. The objective wasn't just killing, it was about shattering both equipment and morale. Traps played their part too, concealed pits, collapsing bridges, spiked barriers. Fortresses became labyrinths of pain, crafted to delay, disorient, and devastate. Delay was everything. Every extra moment the walls held gave time for the attackers' supplies to dwindle, diseases to fester, or reinforcements to arrive. Siege combat was a war of endurance. While attackers relied on brute force, defenders leveraged ingenuity and fury. Raw destruction was only part of the aim. The other was psychological dominance, breaking spirits before the stones ever crumbled. Siege weapons symbolized doom. Each creaking tower, each hissing projectile launched from a catapult or trebuchet was a message. Safety was an illusion. This was understood by ancient commanders. Some would flaunt their siege machines, parading them through deserts or building them in plain sight, turning the build-up into a deliberate spectacle. Fear was a weapon in itself. Payloads often carried grim messages, severed heads or rotting corpses sent soaring over walls, not just to kill, but to terrify and demoralize. At Constantinople, defenders endured both rocks and bodies hurled at them, spreading panic and disease. During the Mongol siege of Kaffa in 1346, plague-infected corpses were launched into the city, a move that may have helped ignite the Black Death in Europe. The trebuchet wasn't just a siege device, it was a herald. You could hear it before you saw it, the groaning of gears, the grind of ropes, the ominous thud of its counterweight, like thunder announcing a storm. But the most frightening part was the uncertainty. Would the next strike bring fire, arrows, silence? The anticipation itself could unravel even the strongest will. The drumbeat of a battering ram or a sudden pause before an assault played havoc with defenders' minds. Commanders sought to instill hopelessness, to convince those inside the walls that their cause was doomed, that their protectors had forsaken them, that the walls they clung to were mere delays of the inevitable. And once that belief took root, gates often opened without resistance. In siege warfare, the collapse of the mind often preceded the collapse of stone. With the advent of gunpowder in the late Middle Ages, traditional siege engines began to fade. Cannons revolutionized the battlefield, a single shot accomplishing in seconds what once took hours. The mighty stone fortresses of Europe crumbled not from fire or picks, but from iron spheres crashing through their defenses. The nature of siege warfare transformed, louder, deadlier, faster. Yet the fundamentals established by ancient engineers endured. Modern artillery owes its principles to the old engines. Every missile and long-range weapon is a technological heir to questions first posed centuries ago: how to destroy the seemingly indestructible from afar. Concepts like trajectory, force, and impact were refined long before the age of explosives. Even contemporary military strategy, shock and awe, overwhelming shows of power, draws from these ancient practices. Those massive siege towers flying banners weren't just war machines, they were psychological weapons. They weren't only built to breach walls, but to crush hope. The remnants of this legacy are still visible in desert siege ramps, in the layered defences of Constantinople, in the circular towers of Europe's castles, each structure a testament to adaptation and survival. And in today's world, though the tools have changed, drones, digital blockades, cyber sieges, the essence remains. Cities are still isolated, barriers are still raised. Only now the walls are digital, but the core of siege warfare lives on. Nothing has changed. One side seeks entry, the other aims to block it. Both are prepared to wait, construct, and destroy to prevail. The battering rams are relics of the past, and trebuchets now sit in museums. Yet the essence of siege warfare remains, just as fierce and devastating as before.